On my third night, stationed alone in the fire lookout tower, I was settling into the familiar rhythm of silence and isolation that came with being miles from the nearest human. The wind whispered through the tall pines, and the woods stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of black waves in the moonlight. It was peaceful, almost meditative. That's when I saw the other tower. I'd been staring through my binoculars, checking for any signs of smoke, when something glinted in the distance, just a tiny pulse of light, faint but deliberate, coming from a ridge I thought I knew like the back of my hand. I adjusted the scope and focused harder. The light flickered again, this time brighter, like the flash of a mirror catching sunlight. At first, I thought it might be someone's campfire or maybe a reflection off metal, but the source was too steady, too high off the ground. That's when I realized it wasn't a reflection at all. It was a structure, a tower, just like mine. I knew the layout of the entire region, had memorized it during training. I was assigned to the only functioning tower in this entire quadrant. Any other structure had been decommissioned or destroyed decades ago, usually due to fire or lack of funding. So where the hell was this second tower coming from? I turned to the old map pinned to the wall near my logbook. Nothing, just forest, ridge, and old growth. No recorded buildings, no markers, no lookout posts. I even double-checked the updated digital map on my tablet, still nothing. For the next hour, I watched it, barely blinking. The blinking light on the other tower continued, perfectly rhythmic, like a Morse code signal. I tried to record the sequence in my notebook, but it was too erratic to decode, almost like it was pulsing in time with something unseen, a pattern that didn't follow human logic. Out of curiosity and, if I'm being honest, I tried to radio dispatch. The static buzzed back at me. I tried again. Nothing. Not even the usual click of a carrier tone. Just pure silence. Like the air between me and the rest of the world had thickened into something impenetrable. After an hour, the light stopped. The tower disappeared into the dark, swallowed up like it had never been there. The next morning, I hiked partway toward the ridge where I thought I saw it. The air felt different, heavier, as if something was pressing down on the woods. The birds didn't sing, the wind didn't blow. My compass needle spun in lazy, uncertain circles. I stopped when I realized I'd been walking for nearly an hour, with no change in elevation. The ridge should have been steep, but the ground remained oddly flat. When I got back to my tower, I reported the strange light as a possible signal or emergency flare, just in case. I was told no one else was in the area. "It's just you," they said. "Must have been a reflection." I didn't argue. That night, I watched again. Just after 2 a.m., the blinking returned. This time, it wasn't coming from a single point. There were two lights, one stationary, one moving around the edge of the ridge. As I squinted through the binoculars, trying to see more detail, I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. The lights weren't blinking anymore, they were mimicking mine, the same pattern, the same timing. As if the tower across the ridge was copying what I was doing. I turned my headlamp on and off once. A second later, the distant light responded with the exact same blink. I tested it again, 3 quick flashes. The response came back, identical. I sat frozen in my chair, hand gripping the flashlight tighter than I realized. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone was watching me from across the forest, and they wanted me to know. I stayed up the rest of the night, trying to understand it. Every now and then, the distant tower would vanish, swallowed by mist. only to reappear minutes later with the same pulsing light. At sunrise, it was gone entirely again. I didn't hike back the next day. Something about the air around that area felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but not natural either. Like a pocket of reality that didn't quite line up with ours. By the fifth night, I started having dreams. Always the same. I'm standing in my tower, looking through binoculars, and I see myself in the other tower. Only it's not me, it's someone with my face smiling too wide, blinking the light in perfect rhythm as the forest burns behind them. I told myself it was stress, isolation, sleep deprivation, but the logs show I've recorded the blinking lights every night since the third. My trail cams never capture anything. And when I asked the ranger station if there had ever been a second tower near that ridge, they paused before answering. There used to be one, the voice on the other end said. Burned down in 1983. Lightning strike. No survivors. But you said I was the only one out here, I replied. They didn't answer. The first time I heard the whispering on the radio, I thought it was a trick of the wind. Late nights alone in a tower dozens of feet above ground, surrounded by nothing but darkness and dense forest, have a way of making your senses betray you. But the sound came through my headset, not the open air, and it was far too clear to be imagined. A soft voice, low and breathy, saying my name once, then silence. It happened just after 2:13 a.m., and the moment it ended, the woods around me went completely still. No insects, no wind through the trees, not even the occasional distant crack of a branch. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. I stared at the radio like it might explain itself, as if the dials would start spinning or a clear voice would follow. But nothing happened. The channel was dead. I tried adjusting frequencies, for an open call, a prank, anything that would make sense. But it was just static, the same lifeless hiss that had accompanied most of my solo shifts. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it had been interference, a stray signal bouncing off. Something strange in the mountains, a weather quirk, maybe even the remnants of a lightning storm somewhere far off. I noted the time and the details in my logbook and tried to move on. The next night, at the exact same time, 2:13 a.m., it happened again. This time, the voice didn't just whisper my name. It said, "Don't go down," clearer than before. Still breathy, but unmistakably human. The words chilled me more than the night air, mostly because they felt directed. Not just general warning, but personal. Like something new, I had considered hiking down the mountain the next morning to follow the strange lights I'd seen days before. I froze, waiting to hear more, but there was only silence. I spoke into the mic hesitantly. "Who is this? Identify yourself." Nothing. I switched channels, tried emergency frequencies, even the private maintenance band we used to communicate with the ranger station. No one responded. I checked the tower's landline, still dead. It always had been. We were told to rely on our radios, unless it was a life or death emergency. The next morning, I sent a message in my daily report about strange interference on the emergency frequency. I was told no one else had reported anything similar. They chalked it up to weather disruption and told me to reset the unit if it happened again. That response did little to ease my nerves. These weren't garbled phrases or static distortion. These were sentences, warnings, spoken with intent. On the fourth night, the whispers didn't wait until 2:13. They began earlier, around 1:45, and they didn't just say my name or give vague instructions. They began asking questions. Why are you here? Do you see them? Can you hear the tower breathing? That last one hit me like a hammer. The tower, breathing. I looked around as if the wooden beams and metal braces might move. On their own, my heart was racing. Palms sweaty as I clicked the flashlight on and scanned the interior. The cabin looked the same quiet static, but my ears felt pressurized, like when you dive too deep underwater, like the walls were vibrating. On a frequency just below the range of human hearing, I turned the volume on the radio all the way down. It didn't stop the voice. I unplugged the radio completely. It kept whispering. I backed into the far corner, gripping my field knife tightly, even though I had no idea what I'd do with it. The voice changed, then deeper, more guttural. It started laughing. Not a human laugh, not something joyful or amused. A wet, gurgling sound, like something trying to copy laughter after only hearing it once. Then silence again. And then, as if nothing had happened, the faint chirp of a bird in the distance. Dawn broke, and the world returned to normal. Or at least, it tried to pretend. From that day forward, I never trusted the silence between midnight and dawn. That time felt like it belonged to something else. The woods, once majestic and tranquil in daylight, felt hostile in the dark. Alive in a way trees shouldn't be. Watching, breathing, whispering back when I wasn't listening. Each night, the voice returned, more confident, more familiar with me. Sometimes it would imitate the voices of my family. My mother, my brother, my old hiking partner. But they never said anything comforting. They asked questions that shouldn't be known to anyone but me. Secrets I had buried deep. Regrets I never spoke aloud. And always, the warnings. Don't leave the tower. Don't look at the windows. Don't let it in. I tried to stop listening, but curiosity is a powerful thing. I'd sit there in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for 2:13. Sometimes the voice would arrive early, sometimes later, but it always came. A constant reminder that I was not alone on this mountain, that I was not the only thing awake in the woods. After a week of this, I started sleeping with the radio locked in the supply chest and white noise playing through my headphones. It helped, a little. Until the night I heard the whisper without. The radio at all, it was right behind me, and it called me by a name I haven't used in over a decade. It started with the trail camera I set up near the base of the lookout tower, just a routine precaution. It wasn't even part of my official duties, but boredom and a growing sense of unease had driven me to take extra steps, hoping to catch sight of any wildlife moving through the area. I'd mounted the camera facing the main trail leading up the mountain, hoping to capture bears, deer, or the occasional fox. For the first couple of nights, the footage was normal squirrels darting across the frame, a raccoon nosing through, fallen branches, even a pair of glowing eyes in the dark that I assumed belonged to a coyote. Then the footage changed. On the fourth night, just after 3 a.m., the camera caught something else. Not an animal, not something I could name. It moved upright like a person, but its proportions were off. It was too tall, its limbs too long, and its walk wrong. There was no fluidity to its motion. It was jerky, halting, like it had to think about every step. The camera only caught it for a split second before it stepped just out of frame, barely visible in the edge of the infrared. I played the footage back again and again, pausing, adjusting brightness, zooming in, but the figure stayed just blurry enough to avoid detail. The strangest part was that it didn't trip the motion sensor. I only found the footage because I was scrubbing through out of habit. The system hadn't even recognized the figure as movement, as if it wasn't fully part of our world, like it was slipping between frames. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, maybe a bear rearing up on hind legs or a human passing through, though no one should have been out there that late. Still, I let it go. I didn't report it. I couldn't imagine how to explain a vague silhouette on a blurry screen. Besides, I was starting to feel like reporting these things only made them more real the next night. I adjusted the camera's angle and placed another one closer to the tower's base, hoping to catch more clarity. When I reviewed the new footage, the following morning, I found something worse. This time, the figure was closer. It stood completely still, just outside the range of the night vision. I couldn't make out its face, if it had one, but its body looked human tall, too thin, arms too long, fingers that looked like they reached past its knees. It didn't move at all, just stood there, facing the camera, watching. There was something deeply wrong about the way it occupied space, like it hadn't been made for this world. Like gravity hadn't quite figured out what to do with it. And again, no alert, no trigger from the motion sensor, just a still figure staring directly into the camera. I started locking the tower door at night, even though no one ever came up. This far, I placed furniture against the hatch that led up from the stairs, something I'd never even considered before. I barely slept. Every creak in the old structure made my skin crawl. I kept checking the cameras, night after night, and every time, the figure returned, always at the edge of the frame, always just outside the light. I tried shining my high-powered spotlight in the direction the cameras pointed, hoping to catch sight of something, an animal, a reflection, anything to give this some logical explanation. But there was never anything there, just trees. Still watching trees. Then, one night, the figure moved. The footage showed it walking, no gliding, closer to the tower, step by step, smooth but twitching slightly, like it was mimicking how humans walk but hadn't quite mastered it. It stopped, only a few feet from the base of the structure, tilted its head, and raised one arm. The screen glitched when it did that. The footage became grainy, distorted, as if the very act of movement disrupted the camera's signal. And just before the recording ended, the figure turned and looked upright toward the tower, right toward where I would have been standing at the observation window. I backed away from the camera screen and turned off the monitor. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The following morning, I went down to retrieve the cameras, heart hammering in my chest. I moved cautiously, scanning the woods, whispering to myself that it was just paranoia, just fear. But when I reached the base of the tower, I found something I hadn't expected. The camera closest to the tower had been ripped off the tree, not broken or smashed, just removed. Carefully, the strap was still dangling. The plastic casing was lying neatly on the ground. Inside, the memory card was missing. Someone or something had taken it. The second camera, the one pointed farther down the trail, had its lens cracked clean through, as if someone had pressed a thumb against the glass until it snapped. I didn't replace them. Whatever was out there didn't want to be seen anymore. Or maybe it had gotten close enough that it no longer cared. That night, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside the tower. Slow, deliberate, climbing. I sat in the dark, knife in hand, not breathing, waiting for the knock that never came. The call came in just after sunset, a report of smoke spotted from a nearby ridge. It wasn't from me. Someone else had phoned it in, Someone who claimed to be camping about 4 miles west of my tower. The dispatcher relayed the coordinates and asked if I could hike down to investigate, since I was the closest one on duty. I agreed, though something about it felt off. There weren't supposed to be any campers in that direction. That area had been flagged months ago for unstable soil and frequent rock slides. But the dispatcher insisted they had confirmed the report, and protocol was protocol. I geared up and started my descent with a flashlight, my field kit, and a slow, creeping unease. The hike took longer than it should have. The air felt thicker as I moved down the trail, as if the trees themselves were pressing closer. I kept checking my compass, but the needle was jittery, spinning just enough to make me doubt myself. My GPS blinked in and out. The forest around me was unusually quiet, no insects, no rustling. Just the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional distant crack that could have been a branch or something else. When I finally reached the coordinates, I expected to find a dying campfire, maybe some forgotten gear, maybe even someone playing a prank. But what I saw stopped me cold. There was a perfect circle of scorched earth. No fire pit, no wood, no rocks or kindling. Just blackened ground, about 10 feet across, with no smoke and no heat. The earth didn't even feel warm when I touched it. It was cool, dead, like it had been burned weeks ago. But I knew it hadn't. There had been nothing here earlier. I had scanned this exact area from the tower before sunset. This circle hadn't existed, and then I noticed the handprints around the edge of the burn mark. There were deep impressions in the soil. Human hands pressed down with enough force to leave clear outlines, fingers splayed, palms flattened. There were dozens of them, circling the charred earth like some ritualistic boundary. They weren't spaced evenly. Some overlapped. Some were too large, others impossibly small. All facing inward. I stood there, not moving, heart pounding in my ears, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The handprints weren't made with ash or soot. They were actual depressions in the soil, like whoever had made them hadn't just touched the earth, but had sunk into it, pressed down until the ground gave way beneath them. The smell hit me next. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't even something I could name. It was sharp, metallic, like rusted iron soaked in stagnant water. It filled my nostrils and made my stomach twist. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and backed away slowly. That's when I noticed something else. No leaves littered the ground in the clearing. No branches, no pine needles. The forest floor was unnaturally clean, as though the trees had decided to withhold their usual mess from this particular spot. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. I looked up through the canopy and realized that the trees above the circle were different, twisted, knotted, their trunks bulging in unnatural ways. One leaned so far inward it seemed ready to snap, its bark split open like a wound. I felt watched. It was an instinct, primal and undeniable, like something was staring at me from just beyond the ring of trees. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the underbrush, but saw nothing. Still, the sensation intensified. Not eyes on me exactly, but something deeper, like the forest itself was aware of me, like the trees were holding their breath. I radioed dispatch and told them what I'd found. No response, not static, just silence. I tried again. Still nothing. I stared down at my radio like it had betrayed me, then slowly clipped it back to my belt. I didn't want to stay there any longer. Everything in my body screamed at me to leave. But I took one last look at the circle, at its perfect shape. the way it contrasted so violently with the surrounding chaos of the woods. Nature doesn't create symmetry like that. Nature is wild, uneven, unpredictable. This wasn't natural. As I turned to go, I heard something. Not a footstep, not a voice, just a hum, deep and low, barely audible, coming from beneath my feet. It vibrated in the soles of my boots, a slow thrum like the breath of something ancient and buried. I didn't wait, I ran. The trail felt longer on the way back, like the path had changed, stretched, shifted. I tripped 3 times and lost my bearings twice. The forest didn't look the same. Trees I recognized were missing. Others had taken their place. Branches reached lower than they should have, catching my jacket, scraping my face like fingers. When I finally reached the tower, I locked the door and didn't move for hours. Later that night, just past 2 a.m., I glanced out the window. The circle of burned earth was there again at the base of the tower. I woke up to the sound of paper rustling, which was strange because the wind outside had been dead calm all night. At first, I thought it might have just been one of my field journals slipping off the desk, so I didn't think much of it. But when I turned over in my cot and looked toward the cabin door, my blood froze. There, taped neatly to the inside of the wooden frame, was a sheet of lined notebook paper, yellowed slightly like it had been left out in the sun. My name was written at the top in thick black marker, followed by a short message in blocky, uneven handwriting. Don't trust what comes up the stairs. It's wearing your face. For a moment, I just stared at it, my breath shallow. The tower was locked. I had double-checked the hatch below the ladder before turning in. No one could have come up without making noise. The steps creak and groan, with even the lightest touch. I slowly got up and peeled the note off the door. My hands were shaking. I flipped it over, expecting a signature, an explanation, anything, but there was nothing. Just that message. The handwriting looked familiar. Too familiar. I grabbed one of my own notebooks and flipped to a page I'd written the day before. The shape of the letters, the pressure from the pen, the jagged way I always write the letter. It matched. It was my handwriting, my style, my quirks. But I hadn't written that message. I couldn't have. I would have remembered. I checked all the windows, locked. The hatch below was still bolted from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry, no footprints on the ladder, no scrape marks, nothing. The tower was sealed, just as it had been when I fell asleep. I sat back down, the note trembling in my hand, and tried to rationalize it. Sleepwalking, maybe. Some kind of psychological stress. Maybe I'd written it in a haze, caught in a half-dreaming state. But I'd never sleepwalked before in my life, and nothing else in the tower had been disturbed. Everything else was exactly where I left it. The sun came up, but I didn't go outside. Not that day. I watched the forest from behind the glass, half expecting something to start climbing the stairs. Nothing came. Just trees swaying lazily in the wind and birds returning to their morning songs, as if the world was completely normal. As if it hadn't just told me I couldn't trust myself. That night, I stayed awake, clutching my flashlight like a weapon and staring at the trapdoor. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I heard the sound of someone ascending. One step, then two. Creaking wood. Not like an animal. Heavy. Human. I stood frozen, breath held, my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to call out, say something. Anything but my mouth wouldn't work. The steps continued. 3, 4, 5. Then silence. I approached the hatch slowly, light beam trained downward. There was nothing on the stairs, just shadows. Then the handle jiggled. I backed up fast, hitting the desk behind me. The hatch didn't open. It just rattled once and then stopped. I stood there, staring, waiting for the next sound. But nothing came. After what felt like an hour, I forced myself to sit down. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. In the morning, I found another note. This time, it was under my pillow. Same paper, same ink, same handwriting. It read, "It knows you're watching. Stop." That was when I realized something deeper. This wasn't just some intruder. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't something I could chase away or report. This thing, whatever it was me. Or at least, it had learned how to become me. It knew my thoughts, my writing, my routine. It had studied me long enough to replicate the details. And that meant it was close. Too close. Over the next few days, the notes kept appearing, always in places that should have been safe. In my journal, slipped into my backpack, folded between the pages of the tower's maintenance log, each one more cryptic than the last. Some were just questions. Why are you still here? Do you remember what you did? Whose eyes are you looking through? I stopped trying to explain it. There was no logic to this. It was as if the forest had grown curious and started experimenting. First it watched, then it mimicked. Now it was infiltrating. And it was using the one thing I thought I could trust, myself. Then, 3 nights ago, I looked in the small mirror above the sink and noticed something I can't explain. My face looked ... off. Not wrong exactly, but unfamiliar in subtle ways. A slightly different curve to the cheek. The hairline a touch lower. My eyes looked darker, more sunken. I blinked, shook my head, and the image returned to normal. But the feeling didn't go away. Now I keep all the mirrors covered. I avoid reflections. I stopped journaling. Every written word feels like it could be used against me, like it gives whatever's out there more ammunition. I don't even write these thoughts down anymore. I just think them. Try to hold them tightly inside where nothing can reach. But sometimes, I find a new note anyway, and it says something I was just thinking. Word for word,